Hi, I'm Mark Shamma'a, and I'm going to talk about an ABC of work points. Work points are an important part of the quantitative aspect of a workplace strategy, and understanding how many work points we have will inform directly how much area we need to rent or build and furnish, and therefore have a very direct impact on the total cost of the real estate, total cost of occupancy. So with that said, let's jump in. Now, I call it an ABC of work points to keep it simple, but in fact it should be called, in my language, an OABC of work points. Why? Because the first work point I'm going to talk about is an office, and that would be type O in my nomenclature. An office may be assigned, or it may be a hot office, but either way it's going to be counted as only one work point because although it may have additional seats, it's intended for one person to use it on any given day or at any given time. And that one person may have visitors, but it's still their one designated work point. It'll have an ergonomic task chair. It'll have a surface on which to work from, but it will be enclosed for acoustic privacy and potentially also for confidentiality and potentially for visual privacy. Now we come into the A side of it. An A workstation is a standard ergonomic workstation. Now, what does standard mean? That will vary from organization to organization, but what I can tell you for sure, it is a piece of system furniture with an ergonomic task chair that may or may not be accompanied with partitions. It may have one or two monitors or not. It may be a height adjustable table. It really depends on what this organization defines as standard for itself. There may be a few variations on theme. You might find that if it's you have managers or senior managers who are assigned a workstation, they may get a larger standard workstation, possibly with partitions and visitor chairs, but open plan. So not an O, but maybe let's call it an A1 for a manager, whereas the rest of the staff might get an A2 type workstation, which is smaller, less partitions, different configuration, reflecting hierarchy. That really depends on the organization in question. Key point though, it's system furniture. And that distinguishes it from a type B, which has also got an ergonomic task chair. So whether it's OA or B, you can sit there and work comfortably for 8 hours a day and not get any back problems. Now, type B may be a large piece of table with multiple task chairs as shown here. It could be a high table. It could be a bar type table, but it must have task chairs for it to qualify as a type B. It could be located at the window. It could be an enclosed space where, like a library space, which is a quiet space. And so you would have a variety of type Bs. You wouldn't expect to have just one type B furniture. You'd want variety to create some excitement in the workplace. What distinguishes type B from type C is the ergonomic task chair. So A, B, and C all have seats. A and B have task chairs, and A, B, and C all have a surface on which to put a laptop and get some work done. But type C, again, further variety, and type C really is kind of choice. You choose to sit at a type C, even though sitting there for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week may ultimately give you back problems. That's up to you. But it creates a nice ambiance, a nice variety of seats. Very often in the work cafe in an office, you'll find type C seats, where there might be soft seats or free, like the banquette seating shown here, or loose seating also shown here, much as you'd find in a coffee shop. So it creates that kind of informality, that kind of alternative, chilled place in which to work, to do work. Now, when we talk about work points, all of these have seats and surfaces. And this distinguishes them from what I'd call a type D, which is not a work point. And I only include it here to kind of highlight the difference between a type D seat from type OA, B, and C work points. A type D seat does not have a surface on which to ergonomically sit and do work. So if there's a little coffee table attached to a kind of an armchair or a sofa, you'd be hunched over trying to do some work there on your laptop. It's not really conducive for any kind of length of time at all. And so it doesn't really count as a work point at all. So type D is there only for reference. Now let's talk about numbers and quantities here. So if we have an organization with, say, 1,000 staff and we want to provide 100% provision of seating, but we also know that maybe only, say, 66% or 2/3 of the people actually show up to work on any given day because we have a hybrid working policy, for example, then those 66% working from office staff would expect to have the choice of an ergonomic task chair on which to sit and not get back problems. So our 1,000 staff organization should provide 660 ergonomic work points from which people can sit at comfortably day in, day out, because that's the number we expect to turn up on any typical day. However, we did say we wanted 100% staff provision. So that 100% is made up by the remaining 34%, and those would be type C work points, where people choose to sit. And what we find is people, even if they can have a type O, A, or B ergonomic work setting, they may choose a type C work point as a matter of choice, just for variety or for personal reasons and personal preferences, or maybe just the mood on the day. So let's look at the type OAB in a bit more detail. Now, to create variety, if we have assigned seating, then we probably want something like democracy going, and we might not have any type B seats at all. We'd have only type O's for the senior leadership and type A's for everybody else. But if we've got an agile working hybrid or non-territorial hot desking kind of environment, we can start sprinkling type B's in there, because if you don't have an assigned seat, why do all the seats have to be the same? And the type B's, kind of how many type B's do we need and how do we split them between type A and type B? So we have here 660 type OABs. Why not 50-50? 50-50 works for some, and that means 330 type B's and 330 types OA. We could go 60-40, 70-30. A more avant-garde, a more dynamic organization may choose more type B's over type A's. A more traditional organization may emphasize maybe 60-70% type A's over type B's. But for argument's sake, that's a discussion that we would have with the organization and potentially also with the designers to see what works best. If we must have type O offices, and they must be assigned, or perhaps they're hot offices, then we might take those out of the type A numbers. And so that type O is provided there, and we get to see how the split in the Venn diagram goes for types O, A, B, and indeed C. So now we get a sense that an organization which has a typical 66% turn-up rate would provide 66% of its seats in types O, A, B. The split between O and A and B would be discussed with the organization, depending on how progressive or conservative it is. And the type Cs form the balance. Now let's explore a bit more detail on that. Some organizations will say, you know what, we never have 100% turn up. And indeed, I've never seen an organization that has 100% turn up rate. So it means that maybe, let's say, 10% of the people never show up. There's never a 100% show up rate. So we only really need to provide 90% of the seats. And that allows us to save a little bit of space and a little bit of money, therefore, by the same token, both capital costs and operating costs. What percentage? That could be determined by occupancy studies and seeing how many people are typically turning up on any given day. In this example, I've just said 10%. That means 100 staff are never expected. Therefore, our type Cs would go down from 340 seats to 240 seats. By the same token, we might want to introduce a buffer. And that buffer, what would it be? 20%? Here we've put 200 staff as an example, and that might be for future growth. And you might do that in the type Cs, because as I mentioned earlier, many people choose to sit at type Cs, even if types A and B are available to them. But again, this is a discussion that one would have with the organization, and it depends on what future headcount projections are indicating. So very much case dependent and client and organization dependent. Now, a further question arises: how do we count work points when they're type Cs? And I would say there's kind of three philosophies in that one. The philosophy that I prefer to apply is where you count every second seat. So although in our base case here we have 340 type C work points, we may actually have 680 seats if I follow this model. This model simply says, well, for every type C seat, we have a second one that is not countable as a work point. And this is because people, when you sit at a small table, such as shown here, someone else coming and sitting next to you is kind of unlikely. They'll probably do a skip one. And you'll see the same thing happening in coffee shops like Starbucks, where people will touch down and it'll only fill up on the second seats if there's no other choice available. A more aggressive approach is to say, well, count every single seat as a work point. And in this case, our 240, or rather our 340 seats in the base case, will be 340 seats. No one-for-one matching, as in Model 2. But I do know of at least one organization that counts every fourth seat as a countable work point on the premise that a person sitting at, for example, here, a table with 4 seats, only one of those seats is going to be countable as a work point. The other 3 are for people to come and visit, chat, and what have you, which is quite a generous approach. As I said, my preferred approach is the kind of the middle ground. Every second seat counts. That means even when the organization is, if it ever is 100% full, it never feels quite 100% full because every second seat is still available. And so you have a surge factor. From a change management perspective, this is also quite good because you can tell people there will be ample seats. In practice, you'll probably find that it's not quite Model 2. It'll be somewhere between Model 1 and Model 2. So it might be, 100%, between 100 and 200% provision, say 150% provision. So, but that really kind of boils down to what's available in the footprint and the final agreed property. So that kind of summarizes my view on the ABC of work points. I hope you found that helpful, and welcome any feedback and discussion in the commentary. Thanks for listening.